desperate for freedom, willing to risk their lives. Runaway slaves escaped from plantations across the Deep South in the 1700s and 1800s.
Slaves escaping slavery in the English colonies north of Florida really had no choice. If they wanted to escape slavery, they either had to go north to Canada or they could come south into Spanish Florida.
Black exiles found refuge with Florida's Seminole Indians, who had also fled to Florida to avoid wars and slavery by the Creek Indians. Matthew Griffin and his uncle, John Griffin, portrayed Black Seminoles in battle reenactments for several years. Then they found out from a cousin that they actually are Black Seminole descendants. Freedom seekers like Hampton Sinclair were in constant danger of being captured by U.S. soldiers or bounty hunters. By 1815, nearly half of Florida's population traced their ancestry to Africa. Their communities were called Maroons. Modern-day historians call them Black Seminoles. Their place in history has often been erased. Fighting with the Seminole Indians in 3 wars, Black Seminoles also led the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history from 1835 to 1838. Reactions and reforms of the rebellion paved the way for the first official offer of freedom for an African American group, the beginning of the end to slavery. With keen knowledge of Florida's wild terrain, courageous Black Seminoles fought for survival. Their refusal to give up revolutionized the lives of African Americans. The Griffins' family homestead in Hernando County is close to many of the battle sites of the First and Second Seminole Wars. In 1817, a wealthy slave owner from Tennessee, U.S. General Andrew Jackson, began invading Spanish Florida, determined to capture runaway slaves and eliminate the Seminoles. With a force of 4,000 soldiers, they burned down Black Seminole and Seminole villages across North Florida.
You know, we have welcomed these people, the black men, women, and children who've come here escaping bondage. Many now live among us in harmony, but still the whites pursue them.
Although some African Americans and Seminoles married, many Black Seminoles were subjected to a form of slavery by the Seminole Indians.
They had tributary relationships with some of these escaped slaves, but that dehumanization never occurred. That people were allowed to marry who they wanted. Children were not sold off. Black Seminoles may have had to provide some of their agricultural product for their Seminole, quote, owners, but they were able to live in their own communities, live their own lives.
By 1820, repeated attacks pushed at least 700 Black Seminoles further south along a river near Bradenton. Their settlement was called Angola. Researchers rediscovered the site 6 years ago.
It was a place where people could live together, where they could farm, where they could live in freedom, although also be on the defensive in case any slave raiders came down to try to steal them, to put them back into slavery.
One of General Jackson's allies was terrorizing Maroon communities along Florida's Gulf Coast, and Angola was wiped out.
We have the accounts of 300 people being captured and taken up north to be put back into slavery. It seems like the community was completely destroyed. Some escaped into the interior of the states.
One of the escapees was John Horse. Turning anger into action, he became a Black Seminole leader and fierce freedom fighter. His mother was from Africa, his father a Seminole. Like future generations of Black Seminoles, his mixed cultures were often ignored.
What becomes known as the one-drop rule meant that anyone who had parents of African descent Even if one of the parents was Seminole, the Africanness overcame them.
At the same time that Angola was destroyed in 1821, Spain gave up trying to secure Florida and sold it to the U.S. More pro-slavery white settlers arrived, and the Seminoles' despised enemy, General Jackson, became Florida's first governor and then President of the U.S.
At the order of your president, people must agree to be removed from our homes to the west. And why? So that the white settlers may steal our lands? Where's the justice in this?
After Jackson's inauguration, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 became law. The Seminoles were among the 5 tribes ordered to leave their homeland. The forced relocation became a trail of tears. Black Seminoles plotted revenge. As Christmas 1835 approached, John Horse led survivors from Angola, recruiting 385 plantation slaves across North and Central Florida. Black Seminoles and slaves joined forces for a massive uprising, burning down plantations, mills, crops, stealing livestock. The rampage of destruction went on for over 3 years. It was the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history, but because of fear of calling it a slave rebellion, it went down in history as the Second Seminole War.
The U.S. military was clear it was both a war by and against Seminoles, but also a great slave uprising. One of the largest and most costly wars that the United States had until the Vietnam War.
Black warriors helped the Seminoles survive 3 wars against the U.S. Army. Determined to try to separate the Black Seminoles from the Seminoles, General Jessup offered emancipation, freedom to the Black Seminoles. Jessup's emancipation was the first threat of freedom for an African American group. It set the stage for Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 25 years later, freeing the Southern slaves. In exchange for freedom, 500 Black Seminoles moved west. John Horse left on September 5, 1842, for Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. 4,000 Seminoles were forced to leave, but several hundred, including Black Seminoles, escaped deep into the Florida Everglades. They remained the unconquered. Matthew and John Griffin are proud of their heritage, but without written proof of being at least 1/4 Seminole, they aren't allowed as members of the Seminole tribe of Florida. With the courage and perseverance of Black Seminoles like Hampton Sinclair, John Horse, and countless others whose names are forever lost in history, the Seminole Nation refused to be eradicated from Florida. Even though their contributions aren't well known, Black Seminoles revolutionized Florida's history and future.
The path was blazed by Seminoles, but also by the Black Seminoles. They cleared fields, they created trails, they ended up creating the infrastructure for the modern state of Florida.
The Black Seminoles led the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. The reaction was a historic offer of freedom which inspired the reform of slavery and revolutionized the lives of African Americans.